Question number 12, Chris Hipkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Education, why does she accept some responsibility as Minister of Education for Bill English's statement that a lot of Kiwis are pretty damned hopeless and they can't read and write properly?
The Honourable Hipkins.
Mr. Speaker, the member has incorrectly stated what I said in this chamber last week. I said, and I quote, "I do accept responsibility for my part as Minister of Education, but we all have a role to play, including the member, in encouraging educational success in all our young people." I do hope the member's rising to affirm that.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary question, Chris Hipkins.
Well, does she agree with Bill English's comment that, quote, "there's a cohort of Kiwis now that can't get a licence because they can't read and write properly and don't look to be employable, you know, basically young males," end quote. If so, is she confident that every student leaving school now, after 8 years of national government, isn't adding to that cohort?
The Honourable Hipkins.
Mr. Speaker, we are focusing on every young person in our schools, and there are different levels of educational challenge, and all schools are doing their very best to meet that. Where we are very sure is that now that we have national standards in place, we can understand much earlier in our system how well or not our kids are doing and intervene sooner. Unlike the previous government, and actually I think it's on record now, it would do away with national standards and go back to driving blind.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker.
I don't think many question, Chris Hipkins.
I don't think even blind people are allowed to drive without a licence. Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. Why did she tell the House in March this year that she had full confidence in the minimum literacy and numeracy requirements for NCEA when she was advised by the Ministry of Education in May last year that the standards weren't up to scratch and needed to change?
Honourable Hipkins.
Mr. Speaker, I said I had full confidence in teachers assessing the requirements for NCEA, which included the rigorous improvement from 2013 for the 10 credits for literacy and numeracy. At the same time, because we are devoted to continuous improvement, the Ministry of Education is working with the sector to understand what benchmarks would be more appropriate, has been investigating the use of the youth assessment tool that TEC uses, has been working with the moderators on how best to understand what assessment is working. It's not perfect, the member understands that, but this government is absolutely committed to continually improving. That's why we've seen achievement rates go up so much under this government.
By lowering standards. Supplementary question, Mr.
No,
Speaker.
that part is not helpful. Just ask the supplementary question. Supplementary question, Chris Hipkins.
Do the current minimum literacy and numeracy requirements for NCEA meet the OECD benchmarks for the minimum level of literacy and numeracy required for life in a modern society?
The Honourable Hipkins.
Mr. Speaker, I think the member is referring to the 2012, or the report published by TEC in December last year, using 2012 information. So on that basis, our literacy competencies are not completely aligned with the OECD, but we are absolutely confident that they relate to our circumstances. However, they do need improvement, and that work is being done.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Chris Hipkins.
Does she agree that it isn't the kids doing their best to complete their qualifications that are pretty damned hopeless, but the government ministers who, having been told minimum literacy and numeracy requirements for NCEA aren't enough to prove school leavers are functionally literate and numerate, continue to sit on their hands and do nothing about the problem?
The Honourable Hipkins.
I don't agree with the member blaming kids at all, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Chris Hipkins.
How is describing any New Zealanders as pretty damned hopeless evidence of her claim the government has high expectations for everyone?
The Honourable Hipkins.
I don't know if the member just doesn't understand or he's just being willful about it, but what the Deputy Prime Minister was doing was quoting what employers have said to him. And And I am aware that we do have young people that do not have the literacy and numeracy skills that they need to be successful, and that's why I told the House last week we have introduced initiatives that are focusing on getting those young people reconnected. We've introduced credits for driver's licence. We are taking a wraparound approach because we are not prepared to sacrifice any one of our young people.
And that concludes questions for oral answer.